So, welcome everyone to today's afternoon session. We're here with Josh Seiden, who, as you might remember, is co-author of Lean UX with Jeff Gotelf, as well as co-author of a new book called Sense and Respond, which I have actually dropped just in the chat box right now. It was published by, I believe, Harvard, and it's a pretty interesting book. It really goes into looking at how different companies can innovate over long term, and what are some of those processes, or rather changes in processes that are required to sustain that over time. And with that being said, I will actually shift this over to Josh, who is going to be talking to us about sort of a reframe of how to approach requirements in product development. And Josh, take it away.
All right. Thanks very much, Jerry. Thanks to UXPin for having me. It's great to be here this afternoon to talk to all of you in this virtual world that we're sharing for an hour. So yeah, let's get going. We're going to talk today about this idea of hypotheses and why you might want to use hypotheses to frame your work instead of using requirements. Let's see. We're going to talk a little bit about Lean UX, which is the context for all of this. We're going to talk about the idea of assumptions and how they are important to identify in our work. And we're going to talk about what we do with those assumptions. We express them as testable hypotheses, and then we run experiments to see if we're right or wrong, and if our hypotheses are true or false. So we're going to just talk a little bit about all of those things. And as Jerry said, we'll have some time at the end for questions. So let's just jump in. I want to start with a story, and this is a story from the early days of my career. I was fortunate to work at a fantastic company in the 90s called Kensington, and I worked on the mouse and trackball team. I was there in the days before the internet was really a thing. It was kind of, it was something that my friends and family at universities kind of had access to, but it was just sort of starting to become a commercial force. People were starting to get AOL accounts, You've Got Mail, that kind of thing, but it was still pretty rare, the internet. But there was a sense that it was coming and that it was going to change business. We just didn't know how. And one day my boss walked into my office and he was very, very, very excited. And he said, Josh, I've got the next big thing. And I said, what is it? And he said, internet mouse. And I sort of looked at him and I was like, okay, what's internet mouse? And he said, well, that's your job. The team and I sort of worked on that for a while. We came back to him after a few weeks and we said, look, there's no such thing as an internet mouse. Nobody needs an internet mouse. We can't figure out what it is. There's no reason to create one. And he's like, no. You guys are going to make an internet mouse. We're going to make an internet mouse. Go figure it out. And eventually, 9 months later, hundreds of thousands of dollars later, we designed, built, and produced this thing. And this is probably the worst product I ever worked on in my life. It was a huge failure. We sold probably 5 units, and it had it was just a Frankenstein's monster of input devices. It had a trackpad here in the middle. It had extra navigation here up in this 5-way key, and that was because the team couldn't agree, so we did both. And it had these shortcut buttons, and it had these shortcut buttons, and again, the team couldn't agree on the feature set, so we did it all. And the thinking behind the internet mouse was there was going to be a day in the future when people sat on their couches and they did the internet, they surfed the internet from their couch, from their big screen internet television. Back in those days, that was called the 10-foot interface. And so we set out to build this device that had that was could be used from the couch. We tried to make it wireless, but it turned out it was going to be too expensive to make it wireless, so we put a cable on it. And then it turned out we couldn't get it certified with a long cable, so we had to have a 6-foot cable. So we had a 10-foot interface with a 6-foot cable. So the whole thing was just terrible. We had no idea what we were doing or why. This is one of these sort of classic cases of solutioning, right? There's a sort of a business problem that's implied. Oh, we make mice and the internet is coming. There's a business problem here that's unexpressed. And then boom, jump right to the solution, which is internet mouse. Go ahead and do it. Create the requirements. Go. Instead of jumping to solutioning, right, we all know that there's this opportunity to start by engaging with the problem. Like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And working from the problem. And so hypotheses, which we're going to get to, are a way of kind of starting with a problem statement and saying, you know, is this problem true? It could be, it couldn't be. Like, will people actually sit on their couch and use the internet? And if so, how will they do it? And so our goal here today is to put at least one technique in place that might help you avoid, you know, creating your own personal internet mouse. Okay. All right, so let's talk briefly about lean UX. You know, the world we live in today has changed a great deal. You know, a lot of our engineering processes that we inherited come from a place where we're building physical objects. The design world, too, comes from a place where we're designing physical goods that have to go to manufacturing. And so in that world, you have to design it right before you start building it, because if you make a mistake and you build the wrong thing, it's very, very expensive and it's very difficult to recover. When I started my career, my first job at Kensington, actually, I was the person who made the Golden Master floppy. So I would take the software from the developers and I would get it onto a clean floppy disk. I'd make sure it's virus-free and make sure all the files were on it, and then we would send it to the duplicator. And it was very expensive. You know, each disk cost us $1. We made tens of thousands of them. We packed them into boxes and we shipped them around the world. So if there was a problem with the software or a problem with the disk, it could, you know, it could be months of having bad product on the shelf before we could get new software into customers' hands. But that's not true today, right? The way we distribute and consume software is different. We consume software in our web browsers and in app stores. And the production process has changed. It's no longer gated by this process where we master stuff onto floppies or onto CD-ROMs and pack them into boxes. We have the opportunity to design and build and distribute software continuously. The best companies are doing this at an incredibly rapid pace. So Amazon, for example, distributes new software to its customers. Someone at Amazon is committing a piece of code and causing that code to go to production. The end effect of that is that every 11.6 seconds, somewhere in the ecosystem, the Amazon ecosystem, new code is being released to production. Right? So we have this underlying infrastructure that is essentially continuous and gives us the ability to design, build, and ship and learn as often as we are capable from a process point of view. And increasingly, if we're not doing this, our competitors will be doing this. So this is the new world that we are living in and moving to. That gives us some incredible opportunities. The first people to kind of wrestle with this stuff were the software engineers at the center of this process, who had noticed in their work that requirements always seem to be changing. And you know, a lot of the conversation around good software development process when I was starting my career was about how do we keep requirements from changing. But the Agile folks asked a different question. They said, look, let's not try and keep requirements from changing. Let's accept that requirements are always going to change. and let's turn that into an advantage in our process. Let's build a process that's optimized for change. So these guys, 17 dudes, went to the top of a mountain in Utah. They came back with the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto said, look, we've got the opportunity to produce software continuously. It was nowhere near as mature then as it is now, but still they could see it coming. We know that change is continuous as well. Let's build a process around a kind of a continuous production of software, continuously checking in with our customers to see if we're right, and continuously adjusting to building the right thing. The problem is that this was all framed as a software development methodology. And so even though I think the intent of the Agile Manifesto was to allow people to learn continuously whether they were making valuable software by getting rapid and continuous feedback, over time, Agile sort of lost its connection to that feedback, that connection and commitment to continuous feedback, and it became kind of an engineering project management system in which getting working code was good enough. But Agile Manifesto says, look, it's not working code, it's valuable code that we're trying to create. And so that's led people to the sort of insight. This is our friend Bill Scott at PayPal says, Agile doesn't have a brain. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing in the last few years has been about trying to take what I think was always intended as Agile, as a way to produce valuable software, and restore that brain to the Agile process. And put the pursuit of value back into our Agile processes by creating a culture of continuous learning with Lean UX. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about all of the things that make up Lean UX, because I want to get to the assumptions and hypotheses stuff. But I do want to talk about a couple of really important points here. The first thing I want to talk about is this idea of iterative development. You know, I think a lot of us who do Agile, we do what I call incremental development. And incremental development is, it happens when you sort of start with a big vision. You say, okay, well, here's this big, beautiful thing that we're going to build. And now we're going to break this vision up into tiny components. And we're going to build one component at a time and build it and build it and build it and build it. And at the end, we've created the thing that we envisioned. And it has a lot of advantages from a process point of view, doing this kind of incremental work, because it creates a very robust structure at the end. The problem is you never get to test whether your vision is a good one or a bad one until you get to the end. And so if your vision is to build the Titanic, at the end of the day, you've built the Titanic, right? And you've never really engaged with the question of whether it's a good idea to build the Titanic. You've just built a pretty good Titanic. On the other hand, iterative Agile says, look, we're going to build a small thing and push it out into the market. These are successive generations of Formula One race cars. And so every year we see a new iteration of the Formula One car. And that iteration takes into account what we learned from last year's Formula One cars, whether they were too loud or not safe enough or not fuel efficient enough, or whatever we've learned. Each year we create a new specification for the Formula One car, and each year, in theory, these cars get better and better. And so iterative Agile says, let's make a small thing, perhaps a minimum viable product. Let's put it out in the market. Let's learn from it. And then let's do it again. And so iterative Agile, you're not building to a vision and saving your feedback for the end. You're getting feedback on what you're building the entire with every iteration. You know, and the reason that that's important is because we are always going to get feedback from the market on the stuff we make, right? We make a design decision. We think this is going to be big. This is going to be the greatest thing ever. This is going to be like internet mouse, it's going to be so great. And then we spend some amount of time and we build it, we ship it into the market, and we discover, look, it didn't work so well, right? Nobody used it, nobody bought it. And so this process from making a design decision to getting feedback from the market, this is inevitable. What is under our control is how long between decision and feedback. How long do we allow? And our goal, right, is to reduce that cycle time, right? To say, look, instead of taking 9 months to get feedback, can we get it down to 1 month? Can we get it down to a couple weeks? Can we get it down to a couple days? Can we get it down to a couple hours, right? There's no one correct amount of time. Every business and every cycle is different, but you want to reduce that time between idea and feedback. And when you do that, you get this really positive impact in your business. This gray line here, this is what happens when you don't test your ideas early and often. You get this buildup of risk in your project, right? You've made a decision. It might be a bad decision, but you won't know until the end of the project, when you ship this thing to the market, that it was a bad decision. And so you're building this inventory of risk. With continuous and early iterative feedback, the idea is you make a decision, you put it out in the world, you test it, and then you pay down that risk, and you do it again, and you do it again. So even though initially you're taking on a kind of a higher amount of risk by pushing out something that's a little half-baked, you never build this big inventory of risk. You always keep your risk low and manageable, and you start delivering value sooner. So all of that is background for, I think, what Eric Ries brought to the table in his book of a few years ago called The Lean Startup. You know, Eric tells this great story. It's very much a kind of an internet mouse story, but on a larger scale. He and his team had spent 18 months building this incredible piece of technology. He was working on 3D virtual environments, and they had spent 18 months on this amazing feature that he was very, very proud of, and it took incredible engineering to pull off. And they've shipped it, they released it, and their customers didn't care about it at all. It was a huge failure. And he was very, very depressed, and he walked around for a while trying to console himself. And he said he thought to himself, well, at least I learned something. And then shortly after that, he thought, yeah, but did it have to take me 18 months to learn that? Could I have learned that same thing in a shorter amount of time and invested less life energy, less painful process in making that same learning? And so the sort of central manifesto of the Lean Startup is stop building things people don't want. Figure out early if they want them, and only build things that people want. So let's talk briefly about then how this gets us to Lean UX. Lean UX is a user experience and product development method. It's inspired by Lean Startup and Agile development theories. And it's the practice of bringing the true nature of a product to light faster in a more collaborative and cross-functional way, with less emphasis on deliverables and a greater focus on shared understanding of the actual experience being designed. And so foundationally, right, what did you hear me talk about briefly there? We talked about small batch processes, right? But the other thing that's really important here is this idea of shared understanding. We're going through a learning process together as a team. This learning process is not something that user experience designers go off and do, or engineers go off and do, or product people go off and do, or researchers go off and do. This is something we do together as a cross-functional team. And so this is important because the hypothesis process that I'm going to talk about is the collaborative cross-functional process. And it lets us take our individual points of view, right, I come to the table thinking square, you come to the table thinking circle, she comes to the table thinking triangle, right? And in the process of that discussion and iteration, we come to both a new understanding and a new idea that is bigger and better than anything we might have come up with on our own. Okay, so let's go to the Lean UX cycle. We are going to focus today on the early part of this Lean UX cycle, right? Where we're going to talk about assumptions, right? That you have an idea, right? A business objective, a vision, whatever. Inside that objective, we have assumptions. And we're going to take those assumptions, talk about how to find them, how to write the hypothesis, and how to test it. That's my dog back there, protecting us from the mailman. Sorry about that, folks. All right. So just to kind of wrap up that section, lean methods, the goal here is to avoid waste, right? Waste is the building things that people don't want, right? We use them when uncertainty is high, right? When we're just not sure whether our idea is going to work, okay? They're really important to use in cross-functional collaboration. This isn't something that that UX people go off and do by themselves. And it's not something that we do once at the beginning of the project and then stop. We do it more than once, okay? It's not something we do at the beginning of the project. We do it more than once, okay? So I want to show you a short video about the scientific method. This is from one of the great explainers of science and physics, Richard Feynman. The sound on this might be a little scratchy. It's a video from 1964, but Feynman is talking about the process that science uses to go about articulating a new law.
Oh, Josh, there's no audio coming from the video you're showing. Is there supposed to be audio?
Yeah, there is. All right. Well, rather than screw around with the audio, I think I'll just summarize Feynman's point of view, right? What Feynman says is the process is first we guess it, then we compute the consequences, and then we compare the results that we get, that we expect by computing the consequences to nature or to an experiment that we run. And if it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong, right? So we make a guess, we imagine what will happen in the future, and then we look at the evidence, we look at the data coming in, and we decide, were we right or were we wrong? And this is radically different from the way most decisions are made in business today, right? Usually, we make decisions because our boss bursts into our office and tells us, you have to make an internet mouse, right? And we rarely have the opportunity to reframe our work as experiment. And so this process is a process that we can use to help our teams and have conversations with leadership that reveal the hidden assumptions in our work, and then package those assumptions as testable statements. Okay? And it starts by declaring our assumptions. What's important here is to identify the fundamental assumptions that we have about our customers, about their needs, and about our solutions that, if we are wrong, will cause us to fail. Right? So if you go back to the internet mouse story, right? There's some fundamental assumptions there. Some were right, some were wrong. A correct assumption: the internet is going to be a huge economic force. That's true. Turned out to be right. Customers are going to sit on their couch and control the internet on their big screen TVs. Not so much. Not so much. Turned out we live in this world where we do sit on our couches and watch TV, but we tend to have the internet in our hands. Right? So when we're thinking about our projects, right, some of these things are on long timescales, but some of these things are eminently discoverable during our product development process. And we want to find the ones, not all of our wrong assumptions, like are they green, should the button be green or the button be blue, which are less consequential, but the really big assumptions that, if we're wrong, are going to cause our project to fail. And the reason we want to do this cross-functionally is that every decision that we make about our offering is a customer experience decision. You know, I'm a big reader of the New York Times app on my iPhone. I'm a New Yorker, and I've always read the, let's see, top stories. New York Times app. I don't know if you can say it. Whatever. I've always read the New York Times, and when the New York Times released their first app for the iPhone, I was very, very excited. I downloaded it. I enjoyed it. And then at some point, I went to go, I was on the App Store. I stumbled across the app again, and I saw that it had basically a 1-star rating. And I was really surprised because I've been using it since it first came out, and I was really happy with the app. And when I went and I read the reviews about why the app was getting a 1-star rating, everyone was upset about the pricing. People were upset that they had to buy a subscription. It had nothing to do with the design of the app or even the kind of functionality of the app. It was the design of the business model that people were upset about. And that design of the business model became a customer experience issue that caused the app to get these 1-star ratings. So every decision that we make as a team about our offering is a customer experience decision. And so that we want to be making these, we want to have this conversation cross-functionally, okay? We want to identify our assumptions across the landscape, and we want to test them. And then we want to evaluate the results. It's not enough to test them. We need to be able to be prepared to change course. When we're looking for assumptions, we want to sit down as a team and we want to ask these sort of fundamental questions. These are sort of typical user experience and product questions. Who's the customer? Who's the user? Where does our product fit in their work or life? What problems does our product solve? All of these things are not fixed answers. They are assumptions that we make when we're starting the design process. But similarly, the business model, when we start, it's also a place where risky assumptions hide. How are we going to acquire our customers? How do we make our money? Who are the competition? What's our differentiator? Things like that. Those are all also part of this early stage assumption finding, okay? So when we sit down to find assumptions, we want to look across the spectrum, okay? Now, getting to hypotheses, we then, in the next step, we've assembled our assumptions, right? We've done our survey, and we want to capture that in some actionable way. So this is a basic hypothesis statement. It has 2 parts. First part is a statement of what we believe. We believe a thing is true. And the second part is the evidence that we're looking for. We'll know that this is true when we see the following evidence from the market. So, and this goes back to that Feynman, right? Feynman idea, right? We guess a thing, And then we compute the consequences of that guess, and then we compare to experiment. We'll know we're right when we see, or we'll know we're wrong when we see. Now, this is kind of a generic hypothesis statement. There's lots of ways that you can take this and make it more specific to your work. This is a version that that we use in the Lean UX book, and it's very, very much tailored to product development and for connecting features, users, and business needs. So this hypothesis statement says, we believe that we can achieve a certain business outcome if these people, our users, our customers, our personas, can achieve this user need, right? What's the goal they're trying to achieve by using this feature? Now, it might fail, and it might fail because of X. And we'll test this by doing Y, right? So this is the sort of, the second part is the evidence, right? What's the failure or success criteria, and what's the evidence we're going to gather to know if we're right or wrong? Let me give you a more specific example of this. At the top is a hypothesis. We believe that if we make the login button bigger, infrequent visitors will have an easier time finding the button and will log in at an increased rate. And so that's a concrete example of that hypothesis statement. And you can see that it's different from what a requirement to make a bigger button might look like. So at the bottom, it says, create a very big green login button on the homepage. And the problem with the requirement is we don't know if that big green login button is going to work. Right? Our goal, our business goal, is to get infrequent visitors logging in at an increased rate. Maybe the login button is going to work, but maybe it won't. Maybe there's a better solution here. And so if we go into this with the kind of framing at the top, we have the opportunity to say, look, we're going to build features iteratively until we get people logging in at an increased rate. Whereas if we work with a requirement statement, we just say, okay, we made the green button, we're done, and we're not being responsible for business results. All right, so next step here in the process is to take our hypothesis and actually put it in motion and test it. And there are a lot of different ways that we can run tests. I'm going to just talk about a couple of them here. But I want to talk about this terrible phrase that we all use called MVP, or minimum viable product. There are a lot of competing definitions about MVP. There's a lot of Medium posts about what exactly an MVP is. But I like this really simple definition here. What's the smallest thing we can do or make to test our hypothesis? And the answer to that question, the smallest thing we can do or make, that is our MVP. The reason I like this is because your MVP might not be a P, right? It might not be a product at all. It could be a pre-sales landing page. It could be a button to nowhere. It could be lots of other things. And so the key is to focus on learning. Our MVP is the thing that helps us learn. And so we always ask the question, what do we need to learn first? And what's the least amount of work, right? The shortest cycle time we need to do to learn that. So for example, if we're doing something like trying to understand if there's demand for our product, we might do something like a Kickstarter or some kind of pre-sales page, right? We would have saved a lot of money on Internet Mouse if we'd been able to make a Kickstarter for it. And we would have never achieved our pledge goal, no matter how nice our preview video was. We would have never achieved our pledge goal, and we wouldn't have had to build that thing, right? So for demand testing, this kind of pre-sales page, whether it's for a consumer product or a sign-up page on a website, these kinds of things are terrific for testing demand. You can do smaller demand tests. Down here, this is a conference calling system called Speak, which no longer exists. They were purchased by a larger company. But Speak was a really cool service where you got your own Speak page. I had mine. It was speak.com/Josh Seiden. And I would just give people that URL. And when it was time for the call, you come to my Speak page, you enter your phone number, you press call me now, and we'd all be connected on a conference call. The folks at Speak wanted to know, do people want to join through voice over IP on their computer? And so they put this link down here that said join through your computer. But they didn't actually build the feature. What happened was when you clicked on that link, you got a button, you got a pop-up that said, hey, thanks for your interest in this feature. We're not ready yet, but we'll contact you if you want to leave your contact information. And what that let them do was measure demand. And it was tolerable because, see, they were in beta, right? So customers didn't necessarily expect a complete experience. So again, this was their MVP for voice over IP. Was there demand for it? They could test it with a link. I'm going to skip this one. It's possible that your MVP doesn't even have to be a technical product. Your MVP for this was a service called OrderX. It was a platform that would let you build food ordering applications. Might be interesting to large corporations, to hotel chains, things like that, that might want to build applications for ordering room service, for example. A platform for building food ordering applications. The guy who started this, he was not an engineer, he was not a designer, he was a salesman who had background in the hospitality industry. So his MVP was a contract. He went out and he tried to sign up pilot customers. And he said, look, here's a contract I've written. Here's my pitch for the product. If you're interested in it, sign this contract. What you're agreeing to do is to build one test application. I won't charge you anything, but any orders that you place through the test application, I get 25 cents an order. Okay. So it's just enough for him to feel confident that there was meaningful interest in his product. Typical prototypes can serve as MVPs. If we want to learn something about user interaction, this is a particularly clever early prototype for the Microsoft Surface Pro. I just want to show you this. This is, they're particularly proud of the cardboard prototype, so we're going to see the outside of it for a moment. But when you open it up, you'll see that to mock up the display here, they embedded, let's see, can you see it? Yes, there's a smartphone stuck in there to mock up some of the interactivity on this Surface Pro. And finally, to test features of a service, you can do Wizard of Oz or concierge testing. This is a project that we did a couple years ago for Cooking Like Diet, where we built a subscription menu service where we were, people would sign up, they'd pay a monthly fee, and every week they would get healthy menus emailed to them. This service had almost no back-end systems. It was a front-end system. When people would fill out their forms, it would come to our small team of wizards, Wizards of Oz, you know, the man behind the curtain. They would get an email. They would compose an email with a healthy recipe plan, and they would send it back to our population of first 15, 20, 25 test users, so that we could learn what features were needed and what the interaction would look like, right? So this MVP appeared to the end users in the system as a fully functional system, when in fact it was just really smoke and mirrors on the back end and a front end that made it look like a functioning system. So those are some examples of some experiments that you can use, some types of experiments you can use to test your MVP. With that, that's the end of the presentation portion of this seminar. let's take some questions.
Great, thanks, Josh. We have a couple questions here. And before I get to them, just a reminder here, I'll drop in the URL for the Slack team. And I'll also drop in the URL for Sense and Respond as well. And we can dive right into the Q&A.
Jerry, should I stop the screen share and go to video?
You could stop the screen share and just go purely to video.
Okay, let's do that.
Cool. So the next question, or actually the first question that we will take a look at is, got it. So someone was curious, what is the starting point for hypothesis creation and who should actually lead that activity? So for instance, is creating that hypothesis the absolute first step of the process, or at what point does that actually come into play?
Yeah. So I think I think a hypothesis comes after you've spent some time doing assumption finding. And so what we like to do is, or what I like to do when I start a project, is to do an exercise. First to kind of, you do sort of typical kickoff discovery activities. You say, what's the project? What's the business problem? What's the user? What's the user problem? What do we know about what we're working on? And there are a couple of vehicles that you can use. Some people really like to use the business model canvas, for example, or the lean canvas, to sort of say, here's the kind of big picture. There's I like to use this thing called an assumptions exercise, which we write about in the book. And it's just a way of collecting all of the big assumptions, right? From the name, who the user profile, user need, business need, that kind of stuff, feature set. And then you go through a kind of a ranking exercise, and you say, okay, well, where are the things that we know a lot about and we feel very confident about? And where are the things that are very high risk, right? Either we don't know a lot about them or we don't have a lot of confidence in what we know. And it's those high risk items that get prioritized to the top of the list. And it's from there that you write a hypothesis statement. So you might say, we believe people will be, we believe people are interested in a subscription menu plan that sends them healthy eating recipes. That might be high risk. You might also have an assumption that says people are interested in eating healthy food. Like, you might not know this, but it's not very high risk. Like, you can find that one out pretty easily. So you're finding your assumptions, you're prioritizing them in terms of risk, and then you're writing hypotheses about the high risk ones.
Gotcha. And someone here has a question about releasing products. So this person is wondering, so following a more iterative process, how do you address the concern of a product owner who might be worried that what you're releasing is actually incomplete? So kind of get over that fear of incompleteness.
Well, so I think there are when you're doing this kind of iterative development, there are iterations that are good enough for pilot, right? Where you might release them. Let's say you have a consumer product, but you want to kind of you want to A/B test something against a percent of your users or 0.1% of your users. So it might not be really ready for prime time, but it's ready for learning. And then you have other scenarios where you're just going to roll it out. It's ready for release. And I think the dividing line there is, are you delivering a complete unit of value, right? It's if I give a thin slice through a workflow, but it gives the users meaningful value, it might be incomplete in that it doesn't have every feature that our vision has, but from an end user point of view, it's complete, right? And we've beaten our competition to delivering it, right? So if you look at the original iPhone, right? The original iPhone, you couldn't run third-party apps on it. It didn't have 3G internet. It had slow-ass internet, right? It was incomplete from a vision point of view, but it was sufficiently complete that we were all blown away by it, right? And there's often that gap. It may not be as dramatic, but there's often that gap between our kind of product development visions and what makes the customer happy. And we can often deliver a whole lot less than we think, right? As long as we do kind of a complete slice through a functional workflow.
Right, right. And there's also a question about when a business is wary of taking any risk or introducing change to their processes. Have you found that there's any particular tactics or techniques that are useful for transitioning them into this less risk, more often way of thinking and operating?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is sort of so for me, it depends on who you're talking to. You can make a kind of an emotional appeal about this, little bites of risk are actually a risk mitigation strategy. It can feel riskier, but it's actually a whole lot less risky, right? And so it's a new way of thinking about risk, but you can kind of make that appeal. The other way that you can make the appeal is much more rational. You can talk about the cost of delay, right? So and that's like a very simple economic calculation, like this feature is going to generate X revenue, right? And if we deliver it, 6 months from now, we lose all of that revenue, the cost of delaying that release. So if we deliver some portion of it now, right, and some portion of it, and some portion of it, and some portion of it, we start capturing value sooner, right, as opposed to waiting 6 months and capturing the value. And so that whole period, Google cost of delay, and the calculation is really pretty rational and simple. So I think depending on who that stakeholder is you're trying to convince, those are a couple of tactics.
Gotcha. And the next question here, and I think you've touched on this with your work with Jeff as well, which is how have you seen that it's possible to implement a hypothesis in an enterprise environment where projects sometimes start long before they come to the development team? So, for instance, the business analysts and product owners already make a lot of assumptions. In that sort of complex enterprise scenario, is there a different approach to creating and implementing hypotheses?
Well, you do need to go at it in a context in which you've got the business decision makers engaged in the process, and if you're not willing to, there's no point in running a test and learning a thing if you're not willing to change course based on what you've learned, right? So if you don't have a collaboration with the business owners, this method is very, very difficult to implement. And in fact, that's one of the big motivations for Sense and Respond, the second book. One of the huge themes of feedback for Lean UX was essentially people telling us, look, this idea, this way of working, this Lean UX way of working makes a lot of sense. We would like to work this way, but we can't. And we can't because our organization's not set up this way, or our boss won't let us do this, or our bosses don't get us, or the business decision makers are in, the next country over, whatever that is. And so Sense and Respond is a book for business decision makers that makes the business case that this kind of hypothesis-driven process is really critical to to success of the business. And if you find yourself, and forgive me for making a pitch for the book, but I think if you find yourself in one of those contexts, that's the case that this book is trying to argue. You might pick it up, check it out, see if there's something there for you. Give it to those product owners.
Right. And let's see. So the next question here is, so this is more about release schedules and planning. And this person just wondering, in your experience working with multiple teams, have you ever seen a scenario where a release schedule, instead of having weekly or monthly releases, they had more of a flexible, holistic approach where the deadlines were more flexible? And if you did you see any benefits from having that sort of looser schedule?
I think that so I think that there's some benefit to it. For me personally, I'm not a really big fan of the very strict Scrum rhythm that says, you decide what you're going to make for the next 2 weeks, and you only work on that stuff, and then you get to the end of those 2 weeks, and then you can make another decision about what to make. I'm a much bigger fan of kind of the continuous kind of Kanban style of planning. That said, I think it's really, really important to be disciplined and structured about identifying what you're learning and reviewing what you've learned. So on the projects that I work on, I like to start the week by reviewing what our objectives are for the week, and particularly what our learning objectives are for the week. And I like to end the week with a review of what we've learned. And then depending on the team, either every week or every 2 weeks, I like to end the week with what I call a decision meeting. And that decision meeting is the team plus the key stakeholders who are looking at what we've learned that week and deciding what we need to prioritize in the next chunk of work, right? So I think you can be flexible with your schedule, but I think that I think it adds noise to the system if you're always trying to figure out the length of your iteration, or if you're always stuck with like really tight iterations. I think what you want is be disciplined about reviewing your learnings and continuous in your planning.
Right. And in terms of in terms of creating and driving the validation of a hypothesis in a company, in your experience, who in an organization is best suited for taking on that responsibility? Is it designers? Is it product managers, product owners? Would be curious to get your take on that.
Who in the organization is best suited to drive learning? Is that the question, Jerry?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Who's best suited for creating and validating those hypotheses?
Well, I think it has to be something that the team owns. Like it's not like, oh, Josh, you go off and learn while the rest of us just build. I think it's something that you need to create a way for the whole team to be engaged. I've seen this process where the product owner, the person who's kind of running the team, is an experienced design leader. I've seen it where it's an experienced product owner. It tends to be whatever that person's background is, whether it's engineering, design, or business. The person who's kind of quarterbacking the whole effort tends to be wearing a product manager hat. But I don't think it's one functional role. I think it's just somebody who has come into that responsibility on the team and who's sort of the quarterback of the team.
Right. And once somebody has reached a point at which a hypothesis is either validated or invalidated, is that the time at which the team can then create their requirements based on the learnings and they're able to move forward confidently?
So, I had the saying, when you solve your number one problem, your number two problem gets a promotion. Uh, so I think there's always the next thing to learn, and so I think, yeah, I think that that there's sort of a two-step process here, which is you're working on, you're trying to learn something, and then based on what you've learned, you're implementing something to support that learning, even as you're moving forward into learning the next thing. So, I think this depends a lot on sort of where you are in the life cycle of the product. But yeah, I think like if you figured out, for example, that a particular design approach to a page is persuasive, right? Then that can kind of then throw off a more structured requirements process, right? And that can be handed off. But it doesn't necessarily have to, right? It could be that you've built enough, you've learned from it, and it depends a lot on the team and sort of how they're actually building the hardened quote unquote product, right?
Right. And going back into the B2B space, someone is wondering, do you see that there's tweaks to the process that need to be made when you're working on a B2B versus a consumer product? Because in this particular case, the feedback loop for a B2B product can be much longer, just due to the complexity of finding, end users and getting access approved, etc. So just wondering if there's any adaptations that you have had to make to this sort of process to deal with that scenario.
Yeah. I mean, I think conceptually the process is exactly the same, and practically the process is fairly different. The major thing that's different is that in a B2B space, you tend to have a smaller set of customers who are, each customer is more valuable than, they're a small set of high value customers. So for example, I worked at an institutional brokerage for a while on Wall Street. There were 1,000 potential customers for us in the world, and our total customer set was about 750. And so each one of them was really, really important to us, and we couldn't mess around. We couldn't take risks that we might. We had to treat them with a great deal of care and caution and love and attention. Whereas in a consumer product, right, you've always got more customers pumping through. So the tactics that you use are very, very different. In the B2B space, the experiments tend to be a lot of face-to-face visits, a lot of traditional design research. They tend to be structured as pilot programs that you offer your best customers and opt in on. But those are the considerations, that you tend to have a longer, a deeper and more meaningful relationship with each of your customers in the B2B space than in a consumer space.
Cool. All right, and since we're coming up on the end of the hour, we will actually take the last question. But before we do that, I will drop in the webinar chat here links to the updated edition of Lean UX, which we actually have here in the office as well. We have the updated version, which was just updated in the last year with a lot of learnings that Jeff and Josh have really incorporated in the 3 or so years since the first version came out. And I will also put in their new book, Sense and Respond, which is looking at much larger sort of institutional processes for designing, or not even designing, but rather creating products in a more intelligent manner. So both are there, the Amazon links. And let's take the last question here of the day. So, all right. I think the last question we will have here will be, this is an interesting question. I think it's one that a lot of people who are designers in an agile team probably face this sort of lack of parity in decision making power. And someone here was wondering, have you seen that this hypothesis driven approach gives designers a more equal standing in decision making compared to developers? Does it give their discipline sort of more of a structure that stakeholders respond well to?
I think it can. Yeah. I mean, look, I think it depends a lot on the culture of the team. But I think if you can bring evidence for your case, my experience is that the team listens. Stakeholders listen, and whether that evidence is sort of classic usability testing, where you just got people in a lab and you bring everybody in behind the one-way glass, or whether it's evidence that you've gathered from running one of these experiments. And so I think if you do it right and the team values evidence, I think what it really can increase it can increase the decision-making IQ of the team. And if the designers are bringing that to the team, I think you get a lot of prestige and authority on the team. And so, yeah, I think that this is I think it's a kind of a decision-making process that gets us out of the sort of everyone has an opinion universe. And when it's everybody's opinion, then the people with the most kind of social power tend to win. But when you can get it out of the opinion space and into evidence, I think the team just makes better decisions.
Right. And I think that's a great closing sentiment here. Thanks, Josh, for your time here, and thank you to everybody who have joined us today, and also in all of the previous sessions. It's hard to believe that this is actually the last session of today, and we just have one more day of sessions tomorrow, and that will conclude this year's Agile UX Virtual Summit. A lot of people had great questions here today. I'll drop in the link for our Slack team one more time because the conversations continue there. And Josh, I'll also make sure to invite you there as well.
Terrific. Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah, we have many of our speakers there. And with that being said, Josh, have a great rest of your evening. And to everybody else here, hope to see you tomorrow for another full day of sessions. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jerry.
All right. Take care.
See you online. Bye-bye.
Bye.